Today on the Take On Board podcast, I'm speaking with Solai Valliappan about learning how to be a board chair. Before we start the podcast today, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we record. For me, I am on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. I also pay my respects to any First Nations people who may be listening today. I acknowledge their continuing connections to land, waters, skies, culture, and country. I support Voice, Treaty and Truth for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and I encourage others in the Take On Board community to do the same. Now, let me tell you about Solai. Solai is the chair of Forever Projects. We'll hear more about that, no doubt, in a moment. And she's on the finance committee of the Sydney Writers' Festival. She was previously the board observer at Hills Montessori School as part of the board observership program, a program I love. Solai is a Sydney-based technology investor, advisor, and board director. Starting her career as an actuary, she transitioned into the startup world 10 years ago. She's been leveraging her finance expertise to advise family offices, venture capital firms, accelerators, and startups across Australia, including investing as an angel investor. Welcome to the Take On Board podcast, Solai.
Thank you, Helia.
It is so awesome to have you here. And I'm really keen to dive into learning how to be a board chair on the job. But before we do that, as always, let's just dig a little bit deeper about you. Tell me, what was your first experience of governance?
It would probably be when I was chief of staff to a CEO. So that was when I was working for an insurance company. So I'd qualified as an actuary during that time. Then I was in the chief of staff role. And so that chief of staff role, you're working for the CEO. Basically, whilst the CEO is in all the meetings, I'm doing the work or answering emails. So you work very closely side by side with the executive assistant because I guess they're managing the calendar and the administrative parts. And then, so part of that role included creating board papers on behalf of the CEO, but also looking at all the board papers that would eventually go to the board as well. And then that also included board papers at the local level. So it was an insurance company that had a global head office in Switzerland, and then also an Asia Pac regional office as well. So there were kind of board papers at the Australia level, then the regional level, and then the global level. Of course, I didn't see all the papers that went up at global, but just maybe if there were any parts that the Australian business needed to contribute towards.
Interesting. Okay. Oh, God, so many questions already, even just about that. So first up, I actually just wanted to touch on being a chief of staff because it's it feels to me like it's a relatively newish term that people are using. Tell me a little bit more about what being a chief of staff is all about.
Yes, you do a little bit of everything. It was so different moving from being an actuary where I was really deep in spreadsheets, there are lots of tasks, reports, to then working with the CEO. You're in the CEO's inbox constantly. Then there's fires to put out, and then you've got to constantly zooming in and zooming out. It was also my first exposure to the entire executive team in a really detailed level, because when I was sitting in the actuarial team, it was purely we sat within finance. But then when you're working with the CEO, you're dealing with operations. And because this was an insurance company, it was also claims and reinsurance and legal and also HR and IT, just everything. And I just loved it. I loved the pace. I loved the variety. No day was the same,
Interesting.
which was actually set me up really well for startups, actually.
Absolutely. Amazing. Okay. And, you reflected there that the experience of governance was often around the board papers at the local level, at the regional level, at the global level. What have you learned from that around what makes not just a good board paper, but what makes a good board pack?
I remember the packs were really big because insurance is also a regulated industry as well. So there were many things that the board had to sign off on. I think now in hindsight, uh, when I say look at startup boards or even the not for profit, as we're creating papers, I think it's a good question of, do we still need this paper, or does this paper still need to be this length, or does it, yeah, could it be like more brevity, or could it go to a committee? So I think that's more about, but also I saw these packs probably 15 years ago now, 15, 17, and I'm sure packs have evolved since then.
Yes, maybe. I wonder, actually, it'd be interesting to know. Okay. I'll draw some of the other lessons in there because it's also interesting to hear your reflections about. Like, I imagine if you're working as chief of staff in an insurance company, it was an established organization. It was a long way away from startup.
It was very established. Like, it was, yeah, very large, multinational corporate. And they also had like a corporate secretarial, company secretarial and governance team who could, and their jobs were entirely to work on the board papers and deal with the board members and all of that. It was almost like a machine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which is very different to startup world.
Very different. And even at the not for profit, like, smaller not for profit stage as well.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, let's dive on into your board journey then. Like, that was obviously an experience of governance, but from a different angle than being, your own role in the boardroom. So you did the board observership program and you're now the chair. T- Tell us a bit about how that developed and how you've ended up in the chair role.
Yes. So I did the observership program in 2020. So we did it in COVID. So instead of in person, I think we started in person and then we're like, oh, I think, like at that point, it was like, we're going to have to work from home or do this from home. So all the training through the observership program was done online. And then, of course, the board papers, so board meetings went online. And also because I was observing a Hills Montessori like preschool as well, this was in education as well. So it was like, how do we manage these like 3, 4-year-olds? Like, can they come in? Do they have to be at home? When they're at home, how do we engage the parents to get involved in their learning? Or, yeah, and then there'd be windows where they could come in as well. So it's like managing all of that risk as well. Oh, it was a fascinating time
Wow.
to be an observer.
Absolutely. That would have been, yeah. And I also imagine, 2020 was such an unusual year that having some, I don't know, scaffolding of something like that sort of program may have also potentially been helpful as well, just to, you know,
It
something to cling
was,
on to
yeah.
of certainty throughout a year of uncertainty.
Yeah, very, very helpful. I actually didn't join a board as a member until mid 2024. So it took some time. Or also, after I did the board observership program, I realized I was like, oh, I think there's still a little bit for me to learn or to understand where exactly I could play a role at a board level. And then also understanding a lot of these roles come from your network or you've got to apply. And increasingly I was being told by very experienced board directors to go and do the AICD course or some kind of company directors course. So I remember doing that in 2023. And the Forever Project's chair role came about because I met the Forever Project CEO in 2020. And that was actually through like a startup mixer that was happening online because of COVID. And so I met the CEO at that time and we just stayed in touch and we were just, he'd call me every now and then and we would just have a chat and I would get some advisory. And so the first step was actually to take on more of an advisory role. And that was the way to come on board as a board member because previously, the board members of Forever Projects were part of the initial founding team. So they were all related or very good friends of the CEO and his wife, who were the co founders of the not for profit. And they wanted to bring in independent board members to. To bring that governance and scale and take it to that next level because they were a bit more operational, which is what the not for profit needed
Yeah.
at that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so me and a few others, Mark had a really interesting approach where he almost cultivated relationships over a couple of years before he decided to do this. And then that was a way where we could both test out how it's like to work with each other. Yeah, and then I was offered the chair role, and initially I actually said no.
Ah, tell me more. Okay.
Yeah, initially I was like, no, like in my head I was like, no, this is my first board role, and it's chair. Absolutely not.
Yeah, right.
And then I just held it for a little bit, and I just thought, oh, actually, this would be a good challenge. I could probably develop things from scratch. I do like developing things from scratch. I'm a very system process oriented person, and I think that's what they need at this time. So, what a good place to. And I remember having this conversation with Mark, and Mark saying, I just said, "What if I would do a? What if I'm going to do a bad job?" And he was like, "And that's why I want you."
Yes. Okay, so who was the chair before you then, and what happened to them? Were they still on the board? Did they leave? What happened to them?
I think Mark might have been the chair. I think the CEO may have been the chair. And so what trying to work it out and yeah, I don't think they had the systems of this
Yes.
is how we go through a board meeting on a regular basis. And at the same time, actually maybe 6 months earlier before I took the chair role, I joined the Sydney Writers Festival on the finance committee. So that was quite interesting because then I could understand, because it's a subcommittee, you can understand what are the board papers that on the finance side eventually go up to the board. So that helped as well to have that insight.
So Mark was the founder, Mark was the CEO, Mark was the founding chair, and then you're the next chair. I imagine that brings some interesting dynamics with it because he's been doing everything and bringing in, it sounds like they consciously wanted to bring in some independence, which is fantastic. But that still changes the rhythm, I guess, or the dynamics. Tell me how that played out in practice.
It was actually very smooth and very. Mark is probably one of the most open, iterative founders that I've ever met. In that he's always seeking feedback, always thinking about how to make things better, how to scale, how to implement things, and he was very aware that he didn't know how to chair or be a board or like wanted to bring in that governance and structure. Yeah, there's absolutely no ego at all when it comes to Mark of yeah, this is an area that I don't have the expertise in, need to bring someone in. And so that's why I had a lot of resistance because I'm not the expert though. But he was like, no, 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 I trust that you can figure it out.
Amazing. Okay, that's well, not always the case of what I hear in the first round of independent directors in an organization. So that is excellent to hear. And so you said earlier, you've said, that part of what you bring is the systems and process. Part of what they needed, part of what you bring is the systems and processes. Where did you start?
I started with an agenda, like all things, and I remember just bringing out my big folders, my big AICD folders, and they had some great templates in there. So I went straight to the agenda section. I was like, all right, let me put this up into a Google Doc. And then we started from there of what are I guess, the foundation points in an agenda that you keep always or what are the headings, and then it's like, okay, we know that we have to do this. So now it's coming up to 2 years with this new independent board, and where we meet quarterly and just getting into that routine of now we know, okay, this is what the structure of the board meeting is, because if the structure is the same, then you don't have to, there's not as much cognitive load. I mean, there is, of course, with the content and the decisions that you have to make, but you know the order of, okay, this is what's happened. This, like, we're going to make decisions in this part. We're going to note things in this part. We're going to approve the minutes in this part. Those big kind of blocks, building blocks. So that was the first thing. That was the first thing we did, the agenda.
I love it. Love. And then I'm wondering if that then rolled into, and maybe it was already in place, but because that's one of my favorite things, governance calendar. Is there that same, like the rhythm of the meeting? Is there also the rhythm of the year?
Yes, so we put all the calendars, like the calendar invites, so it's in everyone's calendar. They need to come. It took us probably another year before we started creating. We're not calling them committees yet, just working groups because we're still work because After about 6 months to a year, we realized we were running out of time in the board meetings as well to discuss certain things. And also, we needed a bit of time to just almost operationally talk about things or decide things then before we formally approve at the board meeting. So that was another thing that we decided to implement of why don't we have some working groups that we meet a month before the board meeting so that it's almost a sounding board for the CEO, and then we can, we've got half going to one working group of the board and the other half going to another. So we've got one that is marketing and operations, and another one which is finance, legal, and risk. So that's the way that we can, and then those minutes go into the board paper. So it's not like you don't know what's happening in the other meeting as well. So there were just all these little things that we're slowly improving and adding and implementing.
Amazing. Okay. Do you go to both of those? I was going to say committees, not committees. Do you go to both of those working groups as the chair or
No,
the?
I'm only going to the finance one.
Yeah,
Um,
fantastic.
I'm not an expert in marketing and well, I'm fairly good at operations, but I was just like, oh, why don't like I don't have to be in everything.
So then I'm interested as well with particularly with marketing and operations, and particularly that word operations. And again, in a startup that's just starting with independence, how do you, as a chair or as a group broadly, how do you manage that beautifully blurry line between governing an organization and being in the operations? What have you got in place there?
Yeah, so the board doesn't do the things. Like, we might in that we've got a couple of lawyers, so they can definitely help with contracts, which is very helpful because we would need to engage in that service anyway. So you're right in that, especially because it's a not for profit, there is a bit of a blurry line. But I wouldn't say that any of the directors work in the business.
Yeah.
They may work on certain projects or give advice or say here's a template, or hey, I had a chat with AI on a thought partner on this particular issue. But yeah, I would say that there's still that separate clear separation.
So I'm interested in your reflections too about this not for profit. My hypothesis is it's not that the fuzzy line between governance and operations is gets fuzzier the smaller the organization rather than the sector. That's my hypothesis, is that if you're a small startup in the private sector or anywhere for profit world, then the roles are a bit blurry. Whether you're not for profit or for profit. Whereas if you're a large organization, whether you're not for profit or for profit, the line is likely to be less blurry. You've got loads of experience in both. What's your view about my hypothesis?
I would say that's, yeah, in line because, and it purely comes down to a resources issue,
Yeah.
a
Yes.
resourcing issue, which is partly the issue. And at a lot of startups, the board directors may come on board because they offer a skill set that is not in the executive team, or they're kind of doing kind of part board, part advisory as well. So they are leveraging that more on a project basis. And I feel like that's the same at the not-for-profit,
Yeah.
especially when I compare, say, Forever Projects compared to Sydney Writers Festival. Sydney Writers Festival definitely has a lot more resourcing than Forever Projects, where it's basically just Mark versus there is a team at Sydney Writers Festival.
Yeah, right. Okay. So yeah, size does matter apparently.
Size matters.
Okay. So, you're learning totally on the tools, shall we say, of being so this is your first board role.
This is my first board role.
Okay.
Yes.
Welcome to the boardroom,
Yes.
straight into the chair.
Yes.
Love it.
As chair.
I often hear from directors, "Oh, I've just joined the board. I'll just sit back and listen and, take my time." You don't have that luxury because you're straight in the chair role. How did you find that?
I actually really enjoyed and thrived in it. Well, I feel like I thrive in it because I guess I like doing difficult things. And I was also like, oh, trust me to have a chair role as well as being for it to be my first board because I enjoy the structuring and creating the process from the beginning. We could co-design it with the with the CEO, with the other directors as well, as many of the other directors hadn't been on a board before. And it was just to be a little bit more gentle in that. I think it was really important to have the structure of this is the agenda of what we'll do. And then from there, we were kind of building the board papers. And we don't have to get this perfect like within 1 or 2 board meetings. It can take a bit of time. And the other thing to remember is that everyone's a volunteer. So it's they're doing this in their as their volunteering time. Also, different people had different priorities as well. So it's how do we make this that you can commit, but it's also light as well, not too onerous, that you can still like people still want to give and commit and utilize their skill set, but they can't dedicate like half a week every week of their time.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, so I'm hearing, you've put in place some of these systems and processes. I'm hearing you're supporting the board as a good board as a good board chair should do. You're supporting the CEO. Who's supporting you?
Who's supporting me? I listen to lots of podcasts, including yours, Helia. And I think that's how I've gotten more confidence in doing the chair role, because I've just been listening to so many interviews and podcasts, and I just take a little bit from each person of, oh, that's a good thing. Okay, why don't I implement that? Or someone says this is how they do it at this big organization, and maybe we can't do it that way, but maybe there's a different way that we can implement. Or so just taking little things and making a lot of improvements, and just hearing from others who have done it before, because the chair role is really interesting in that you are a peer, but at the same time you're kind of, I don't know, I would describe it as like first violin of an orchestra, right? Where you're
Great
kind of
way.
the lead,
Yeah.
but you're also in the
Yes.
orchestra.
Yes, such a great
Um,
way of putting it. It's interesting. You're doing your learning from listening to podcasts and other ways, and that is exactly what is going to be happening with people watching and listening this one, going, oh, so. And you said, I think that you just identify some key things or little things to take away. So, what are the key things you want people to take away from the conversation that we've had today?
I think it's just do it when you I I think you get we there are so many resources and tools to be able to do the role. So I think that there's no shortage of being able to try it, and you can always just experiment, and then it's like, okay, well that didn't quite work. Let's implement things. It's been also really valuable to get feedback from the other directors as well. So that's been like that's a constant thing where at the end of every board meeting, it's like, any feedback on this meeting? Is there anything we should change? Even at the beginning, I remember one board director was like, "Hey, can we put like the time, like in each for each board agenda?" And I was like, "Oh, that's a great idea." And then the other thing that I'm really meticulous on is like starting on time and finishing on time. Yeah. So I remember there was one stage where there was a really juicy thing, and I knew that we were just not going to cover it. And I just flagged it early. I said, we need the time. Do we all have like, just 40 minutes next week? I know that's a lot. And everyone was just like, I'm really appreciative that you did that instead of going over.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Woman after my own heart with the start on time, finish on time. Absolutely. Amazing. Okay. So I can already hear in there's some beautiful tips that people listening are going to be taking away. There's somebody out there listening to this right now who's probably just been asked to take the chair role and going, will I, won't I? And you've just given them some beautiful tips on how to do that, which is fabulous. Um, is there a resource you would like to share with the Take On Board community?
I've actually really been enjoying the AICD podcast as well. Boardroom conversations.
Yes.
I don't know if you're probably familiar with
Yeah.
that one as well,
Yes.
which is also quite interesting to hear really established board directors, and especially when they talk about their time when they first started as well. It's a good reminder to remember, oh, they were starting at a point one day as well.
Yeah, that's right. Everybody started somewhere just by saying yes, like you did. Eventually.
Yes,
Took you a while to say yes, but you
eventually.
got there
Yes.
eventually. the reflection that you've given, both about your wisdom of joining a board, but also the learning and listening to podcasts and learning and taking something away from them. But it's exactly why I established this podcast. So it is fantastic to hear that that's how it's been taken. And you're now paying it forward with the next lot of wisdom being pushed out to the Take On Board community that they can take something away from it. So thank you so much for getting in touch, for taking the time to share your wisdom with the Take On Board community today.
Oh, thank you, Helia, and for everything you do in the community. There are so many women who really benefit from what the resources and what you share.